Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of International Pod TV, formerly IBM TV, and I'm the host of World Edition. And on World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about sustainable innovations, and what we can do as a world to build back better and stronger. Today, I want to talk about race and justice in America. Tomorrow, I will devote my monologue to George Floyd in honor of his death 1 year ago in 2020, May 25th, 2020, when Derek Chauvin held a chokehold on his neck for 8 seconds and George Floyd died at the hands of a police officer. This sparked a series of rallies and protests and aggressive Black Lives Matters rallies across this country, asking why would this happen and what could we do to address race relations. Today, I just wanted to begin my conversation. I didn't really have a prepared monologue, but I wanted to share some ideas with you as we begin our conversation, and we're going to talk about it for a few minutes every day. But first of all, racism is something that's existed in America and many nations for all of our nation's life in the United States of America. And we know that it existed for a very long time. But at the end of the day, the question becomes, what can we as a country do about it? You see, rallies and protests are not enough. I think we have to understand that racism has existed and always will exist. But there's a difference, in my opinion, between racism and bias. And we as a nation can come together and have a conversation. And that may not necessarily mean blaming somebody that's white American, that they are racist just because they are white, or automatically going into a conversation assuming something about each other because we look at the mirror and realize, for example, I am not white and that I'm talking to someone that is white. That shouldn't really affect our conversation with each other. But there is no vaccine, there is no shot, there is no quick fix for racism. We cannot diagnose it on a medical exam. But I think we need to begin to identify solutions of how do we get ourselves to a place where we can have conversations often that are uncomfortable, but necessary. 1 year ago today, George Floyd lost his life. I do believe that his death has changed the world for the better in the sense that we are starting to have some conversations about this. All around the country, there are going to be memorials and rallies and conversations about honoring George Floyd. But the most important thing I think we can do today on World Edition is have a very brief conversation about what we think it's going to take to solve this problem and to have an honest conversation with each other. And of course, we're going to talk about other things going on in the world. So I'm going to begin now to bring in our guests, Mark Lee. And Shakeel Latimer is coming in, I think. Hello, Shakeel. And Sasha Star.
Good morning.
I'm sorry. I'm having, I hope my monologue was okay. I'm having migraine headaches the last couple of weeks. We don't know what's causing them. And so I go into excruciating pain and I'm just not myself. So I really wasn't at 100% today. So I apologize for the viewers. And I wanted to begin just with a conversation. We don't want to dominate the show on race. And I do want to talk about Israel and other things going on in the world now that we have a ceasefire. But the point I was trying to make is that George Floyd did die a year ago. And since that time, we've had a lot of conversations about race. But I thought what we could do today is start with the definition of racism. What is racism? And also, what is bias? And how do we differ from the two? And how do we come up with solutions? And I'm gonna speak on Nick Paladiva's behalf today because I do agree with him. Yeah, no, but I'm just saying before I hand it over to Nick. Nick has made some very good points about how often the conversations that we have are driven by the media and the press. Shakeel Latimer has had some very good points about how oftentimes He's not the right wing white conservative on the show, but Shakeel has some good points about how often we can be biased by what we see in the media ourselves, right? Which makes it very hard to have a conversation, right? So I'm going to open up the floor. I'm going to go ahead and start with Mark Lee, who is a black man, as far as I can tell.
Who cares? Who
No,
cares? This interview on that.
yeah,
But the answer.
exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
definitely
but
a light-skinned
what's your,
African American. You know, we come
what's
in
your,
all shades,
well,
and that's one of the things.
before I do that, let me throw something out here that real quickly before we begin, and I'm just going to be blatantly honest here, and I think Shakeel Latimer is going to like what I'm saying here. I myself have never been very conscious of my race. Now, I don't know why that is, but a lot of times I forget that I'm an Indian American. I think I'm a white man living in America because I just, I grew up in West Virginia, but I also believe that I haven't experienced as much racism as Black Americans have, because my mom and dad's ancestors didn't come here on slave ships. So I myself have not experienced much racism. I just want to say that out in the gate. I have not experienced much racism in my life.
So basically, of all the people of color, the only people that have had a bad experience are African Americans in America, right? Like they haven't had a bad experience anywhere else. The Indians weren't enslaved by the British. You know, the British weren't enslaved by the British. The Romans didn't enslave the Romans. The Greeks didn't have slaves. It's just African Americans, and in a nonpartisan way, let's build the world. The world has to build back better, which is the Democrats' current sort of catch cry.
No, I think well, no, let's start with Mark Lee. But no, I disagree. What I'm trying to say is that, I do believe that there have been Asian Americans there's a lot of Asian hate going on right now. Of course, India was dominated by the British. You're right, Shakeel. I'm just saying that there's different perspectives that we bring to the table. So I just want to get Mark's perspective first, and then we'll go to, but Mark, what's your perspective from where you sit?
I mean, racism has existed for a long time. It's something I've had to definitely been aware of ever since I was born. So, like I said, my dad was involved in civil rights after having spent some time in the Air Force and all of that. So, definitely he got involved in the civil rights movement here in Durham, North Carolina, and is still known by a lot of those people in that community, and is he's also known for his artwork as well, but he's definitely known in that realm as also because of some of the work that he did in the past in the 60s and the 70s. And I remember writing a paper when I was going to a summer camp about what would Martin Luther King be doing at that particular time. And we're talking about at that time I was in high school. It would have been like around 79 or 80 or something like that. And I remember writing that I thought he would be fighting against a lot of the injustices that are going on, whether that's economic injustices, whether that's things dealing with food insecurities, whether that's a number of other things that are still continuing to be fought some 50 years later. I mean, like I said, I wrote that in 79, I believe it was. Of course, King died in the late 60s. So definitely a lot of these things have been going on for a number of years, and they continue to be fought. I do agree with something that Shakeel said, which is that a lot of times it has to do with colonialism, and it's not just racism, it's also colonialism, and that's definitely a very real factor in the world, and that's something that even Martin Luther King and a lot of the other civil rights leaders have talked about in the past. So we have to be clear that it's a multi-layered discussion. It isn't just about race, it's also about colonialism. It's also about something that Nick brings up a lot of times, which is class. And definitely there is a class divide as well. So all of these are part of the things that have to be discussed, that have to be had different solutions to, and all of that. So those are some of my thoughts. And by the way, and Nick may not even be aware of this, but we had the great pleasure on Saturday, I believe it was, of one of our own doing some great communication about things dealing with race and definitely the ways that different cultures are perceived and all of that. And that's our very own Steve Rao, because Steve Rao was part of the National Association of Black Journalists and our Triangle chapter, and they were having a whole discussion.
And Nick, this would make you proud, because I'm sorry, Sasha, we're going to go to you in a minute. I got a little nervous because Renee Chu, who's one of the best journalists in North Carolina, she's the anchor for WRL. She was on with me. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I felt like, you know how you're not there you don't know anyone there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I see Mark Lee show up, and it was like someone put a shot in the arm, and I just kicked butt. And today everybody's been emailing me, Steve, you were great. And now I know, like, every major station there, they want to like hang out. So Mark Lee, thank you.
No
We're
problem.
We're family.
Yeah,
So,
no problem.
let's
Glad to be there.
Let's go to Shakeel Latimer real quick, because he's just giving me that evil stare. It's just scary.
You said Sasha was up next, so I don't want to
Okay,
push
Sasha, you go first, Sasha.
Okay, you are so proud of yourself, but I'll tell you how much I'm proud of myself. 100 times more than you are, believe me, Steve. You know, what's happened is that on Friday, I played a 3-minute game on chess.com against 2,400 player, and I defeated him in a brilliant style. So yesterday on the program, on my chess show, I had Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky and Ken Regan. So Alex Yermolinsky, and I showed my game, but I didn't want to say that it was my game. So I said it's a mystery game. Just watch it. So they saw the game. Wow. And then they asked actually who are the players, and I said that the white player was myself. So it's really impressive. And then he showed one of the latest Carlsen games against Wesley So. And Carlsen played absolutely some typical computer moves. He won the game. And Alex Yermolinsky was very critical and said, you know what, Sasha, your game is way much more interesting than this Carlsen's game. So he made my day big time. I couldn't believe what I could.
See, Sasha, a lot of people don't know Yermolinsky was U.S. champion for many years.
Oh,
he was a very dominant player in the United States, the Euro. So I'm just very proud that you actually got him on international broadcast media in our network, because it's almost like getting Peter Sampras on the show for tennis players.
Yeah.
Peter Sampras used to be one of the best tennis players in the world. Well, Yermolinsky used to be one of the best chess players in the world, and he's appearing on our television show. So I think that's impressive. They're able to get somebody of good quality on our show to begin with.
And by the way, I was proud of the Pod TV team. The point I was trying to make is you guys are like family to me now. And when I see one of you guys, it brings out the best of me. That's the point I was trying to make. So I wasn't proud of myself. I was proud of all of us.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway.
Now, do you want to go down under and listen to what's happening on the wrong side of the hemisphere, the Australian Kangaroos? Is that the name of their football team, the Kangaroos?
Yeah.
Now that I found out that Shakeel is now a media personality, he's no longer considered an investment banker. He's like Mark Cuban and Donald Trump, no longer in investments, now just a media personality.
Can you imagine the amount of hate mail I'm going to get now that you've said that I'm like Donald Trump?
No, you are. You're like Donald Trump and Mark Cuban. You're going to get hate mail from both their fan base.
Yeah, exactly.
E-flames all over the place.
Now, I do want to say, Steve, I know you said that you haven't felt personally a lot of racism. I have. I've felt it, right? Growing up in semi-rural Australia in the 80s, I know what it feels like. And someone mispronouncing my name.
Yeah, I had that too. I did.
Someone not being able to pronounce my name correctly or saying it with an accent isn't racism. You guys say Megan. In Australia, we say Megan, right? Like you guys say Danielle. In Australia, we say Danielle. If mispronouncing someone's name is racism, really, like it's just what we've gotten to now is a level of just sheer pettiness. Okay. And it actually detracts from real issues. It detracts from issues in countries that are predominantly people of color, occupied by people of color, that are struggling with food insecurity, that are struggling with poverty, with not having enough medical supplies, and not having enough medical people that are trained properly, contracts not being enforced, rampant corruption, that sort of stuff that happens in a lot of developing countries. Those are all important issues that we as a society can try to address or try to help other nations address. And within our own societies, we can certainly try and do something to make sure that people who have historically been held back are not held back, that we can do something to try to make a difference, to those people. But when we are just looking for it, when we're just looking for these petty nonsense sort of arguments, it's ridiculous. Now, look at LA at the moment. They're trying to recall not Gavin Newsom, the DA, I forget his name, the new DA for Los Angeles County, who's releasing people who are who've been locked up for life for violent crimes, and let's just release them because it's racist to have all these people locked up. I don't think that very many people are looking at the color of someone's skin when they look at the crime. It is, did you commit an egregious crime that hurts society? People talk about George Floyd. My reaction to that when I first saw it here in Australia was that police brutality and police corruption is something that every society should focus on. I think we are judged. I think any society should be judged by how they treat the most vulnerable people, the old, the insane, the children, who are often very similar to the insane, and people who are probably who are disadvantaged in some way. But nobody talks about the Tony Timper case, where they did a similar sort of thing, and this guy called the police himself. He called the police for help, and the police killed him. Where was the riots about that? So if we're going to talk about reforming the police and holding the police accountable and trying to make positive changes, that's great. But if we're talking about just getting rid of the police altogether, the people that are the most hurt by that are the poor black people. And, the rich black people in Beverly Hills are not going through the same stuff as poor black people living in rural Mississippi. It's just not, they're facing different things, and you can't treat them all exactly the same. So I think that the definition of racism today is no longer about where a system, deliberately is biased against an individual based on the color of their skin. I think that racism today is a fabrication to help certain people pursue their own selfish political ambitions. Yes. And BLM's solution, by the way, is let's dismantle capitalism. Let's become Marxist. Let's support the trans movement. Now, I'm not saying I've got anything against the trans movement, but the issues that affect the trans community have nothing to do with the issues that affect the black community. They are completely separate issues. Marxism, let's destroy the family unit. What does that have to do with black people? Were black people all of a sudden after the civil rights movement, were black people after they were freed from slavery and they stayed within family units, were they better off or worse off when black families started to break up? This is all just about helping some people get political power and influence with no care or consideration for the people that they claim to be helping, in my opinion, and not just in America, but all around the world.
Very good. I mean, and I think that we're going to spend a few more minutes on this. But, sorry. Can you hear me now?
No, Mark was muted. He was trying to say something.
Go ahead, Mark.
You're still muted, Mark.
He's still muted.
Still muted.
I got you. I was saying,
you're good.
First off, there I am. I'm back. One of the things I was going to say is that in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, actually the movement did something that in some ways was brilliant. And in some ways it kind of has caused it to be painted into a corner. But I'm going to tell you what they did, which I think it was brilliant in some ways. Historically speaking, if you look at civil rights leaders and if you look at civil rights movements, they have oftentimes been a top-heavy organization, meaning that if you found out who the person was at the top, you got rid of the person at the top, then the movement would kind of fall apart. That's kind of what happened with the civil rights movement of the 60s, and I would argue part of the 70s as well. But what the Black Lives Matter movement did is they intentionally did not create full hierarchy. So to say that, the Black Lives Matter movement is made up of this agenda.
The co-founder of Black Lives Matter just went and bought millions of dollars worth of property, the self-avowed Marxist that she is. So whether the hierarchy has an illusion that everybody is equal, right? The money still flows up to the top, just like any other capitalist system.
And that was part of my point. That is one part of the movement. That is one of the founders. There are several founders, and they don't all have the same agenda, the same necessarily statements and everything. So yes, the one that you're talking about has been, and there are a couple of them that may follow the Marxist agenda, but there are some others that are strict what they call black capitalists. So like I said, to say that the organization is strictly a Marxist organization, I think that that's a disservice, because the organization was intentionally formed with a non-hierarchy. So they realized the problem of the past. So they tried to form an organization that you couldn't take just one of the people down, because that's what's happened historically in the past as well. So that's what my point is.
The tragedy of that, the tragedy of that is that there is no doubt millions of people in America and you know, many people of color and black people in America who feel as though they are struggling to get ahead and struggling to improve their lives, and the American dream is not accessible to them, who find it appealing to have an organization like Black Lives Matter represent them. And then you have Black Lives Matter founders that aren't representing them. They just want to make their own political statements. They just want to go out there and do all that sort of stuff. And look, I'm sure that Black Lives Matter does a whole heap of really good work. But on the same token, you know, we see some videos. Like I saw a video fairly recently of a black girl twerking on a statue or near a statue of a black historical leader. Really? Like, I'm sorry, did any black kids at school that day get a better grade because some chick was twerking?
Well, I mean, that comes back to one of Nick's favorite topics, which is the media rise of media stars and them coming out of nowhere with twerking and all kinds of other stuff.
Exactly, but it's just the optics and the tokenism, right? It's the same thing with Kamala Harris. Nobody can ever tell me in what conceivable way any black person in America was helped by the forced election of a rich Californian woman of color. How did that help somebody? If you're in Georgia or North Carolina or, you know, wherever, and you're struggling and you're a single mother and you're trying to raise some kids, in what conceivable way was her election in any way helpful to you?
Well, let me say that really quickly, Shakeel. One of the
who are black, but who are already on the other side of that equation and doing well, but they don't do anything to help the actual black people that need the help, and it's a tragedy.
Well, I would agree with you that more of the upper class need to do like LeBron James, and I'm not even a big LeBron James fan, but they need to go back to the community and do more work within the community. So I would agree with you on that. Now, one of the things
LeBron James saying that, you know, all these negative things about the police, but having no problems at all surrounding himself with the police when he needs them. That sort of community work.
No, I'm talking about if you followed LeBron James, he's actually gone into schools. He's actually gone into a lot of other places and actually built entire buildings and communities. And he's actually funded some communities in his area where he was from in Ohio. That's why a lot of people that know of his history and are aware of what he's done are big fans. I know that actually one of the people that Steve had the pleasure of being moderated by, Beverly Mahone, is a big fan. And she's a media person here in this area, is a big fan of LeBron because she comes from that Ohio area. So she actually knows personally some of the things that he's been doing in that regard. So like I said, I'm not defending the celebrities all across the board, because there are some others that have not done nearly enough, including one from right here. I mean, I think that Michael could do a lot more than he's done. And when I say Michael, I'm talking about Michael Jordan. So like I said,
LeBron
James, absolutely.
Commentary on Malcolm X was laughable, and you know, I'm not trying to take away from his achievements. I'm sure that he's done many good things, but some of his comments about the police have been very harmful, and let's hold him to the same standard then that you'll hold a white person to. A white person who does a whole heap of charity work, but who says something wrong that the BLM or the cancel culture crew don't like, that will automatically outweigh all of the good work that they've done. We have a woman here in Australia called Margaret Court. She won a Grand Slam tournament. She's one of the best tennis players in history. Yes. Now, Google, the great Australian Google, right? Oh, that's right, American Google. They've decided that they're going to rename the stadium that's been named after her because she, as a strong Christian woman, didn't support gay marriage. Okay? So therefore, let's cancel the woman. Let's cancel her. And you know what? It doesn't matter that she provides 3,500 meals or 4,000 meals a week to poor people in Western Australia, where I'm from, and her church is not far from where I used to live. It doesn't matter at any of the good work that she does. What matters is that she said something that's not politically correct. Now, fair enough, because Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights, so we don't actually have freedom of speech in this country. But how dare America start interfering? How dare some bunch of liberals in California start thinking that they can dictate and then change the name on the map?
Did we get it done? Did we get it changed?
You change it on Google Maps, right?
Okay. And then we did get it done.
So
I don't know what your problem is, Shakeel.
What an outrageous
right makes right. So we're right and we're might.
So I believe that if we're going to hold people to that standard, let's hold everybody to that standard. Okay, if you're not going to do that, then I don't think that any person of colour can sit there and look at white people and go, "Oh, Whitey's the problem. Whitey's so mean to me." Bullshit.
Hey, Shasa, your turn. Sasha.
Actually, Shakeel, your story about Margaret Court made me laugh so much. And you know why? Okay, let me tell you something. I think, Mark, you mentioned a few times here and there about Marxism. Very few. I'm not positive or negative about Marxism. It's everyone will judge for himself. But I want to tell you something. Very few people know is that Marxism is not some kind of scientific a method that died when Karl Marx has died. Not at all. Yes. The Lenin and Bolsheviks in Russia, actually they enhanced the theory of Marxism, and they went much farther. And one of the developments of Marxism was, and it was tried in the early 20s in Russia, the decision was that to make people fully develop as personalities, what they need is that all this like family stuff, husband, wife, and all this stuff, it's all grossly outdated. And the new way of life would be to have a communality system when all people, men and women, and they all live together and there are no families. All women belong to all men. And some women would have born kids, so all community together would raise those kids, and everything was fine. Actually, a lot of male Bolsheviks liked that system, because when you have potentially you have hundreds of women available to you, what could be greater than that? But you just mentioned in your story about Margaret Court the gays and lesbians, and I started to think how they would fit into this communal system. How would that work?
That's a very simple answer, Sasha. I brought this up on the show not long ago in relation to the World Economic Forum. So the plan is that that women will be impregnated by men that they don't know who the man is, and that at birth the child will be taken away from that woman. So she'll never get to see the kid, and all kids will be brought up communally, because that way you've got absolute equality. Okay, this is nonsense, and this requires an extreme level of force, and it's not sustainable. Right? This kind of thing, it might last 100 years or whatever, but this sort of thing, it always comes crumbling down. It comes crumbling down because the people at top fight each other for more and more power. Okay, it's outrageous. But what it means is you're not gay or straight or anything. Who you have sex with, how frequently you have sex with at all, is not for you to choose. And the people at the moment who believe in bigger and bigger government, pushed to the extreme, that's what you're giving up. You're giving up all choices for yourself. You are no longer able to make any decisions for yourself. You are going to trust government to do that. And people seem to think that government is functional. I don't know in what conceivable way government, especially American government, is functional. But if you think that your entire life, right down to with whom you should have sex or whether you should have sex at all, should be made by the cretins at the DMV, there's something wrong with you.
Hey,
Like,
Shakeel.
there's something wrong with the education system that's brought up a generation of people.
No, the education
who have
system totally messed up.
and then subjugate themselves to government employees. What nonsense!
No, the education system totally messed up. And by the way, like I mentioned last week, I recently got on Clubhouse, and I can tell you that being on there, I've heard several people, including one of the conversations I was on last night, that have talked about the education system and how messed up the education system is. So I think the entire nation recognizes that the education system needs a major reform. But that actually comes back to even the criminal justice system. One of the questions I was going to ask, I was curious to hear people's thoughts on. Actually, got two questions. But the first question is dealing with the prison system, and that's the fact that nobody doubts that the prison system is unfair in a lot of ways in the United States. I would argue definitely around the globe, but definitely here in the United States in the way of who is actually in the prison system, why they're there disproportionately, and things of that nature. But now it is moving to a private community. So a lot of these prisons are now private. So as a person that is involved in investment and is actually most of y'all are involved in investment, what are your thoughts about the fact of we privatizing that part of the criminal justice system, as we already have acknowledged that it's corrupt? So I don't know whether privatization is going to help or whether it's going to harm folks, but I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's pretty important. First question would be, of course, does it pay a dividend? Dividend's important. Okay, number two, price earnings ratio. That's important. What's the potential for growth in that industry? That's important. What's the debt equity ratio? All those are important factors, Mark, that we should look at. Is there anything else to look at?
I think, Mark, I think that the issue of whether or not there is overrepresentation of American blacks and people of color within the prison system has no material effect on whether or not prison systems would be better run if they're privatized. That's what I mean. I'm not a fan of privatizing prisons. However, private anything works better than government. Like seriously, private anything. Name one thing the government has done ever in the history of governments that they've done better, more efficiently, on time, without nonsense in it, that's been better than what private enterprise would come up with. Let's look at the legal system, because people talk about all these people that get caught in laws and they end up in jail. Yeah, that's because, first of all, don't speak to the police. Just tell them that you want a lawyer. That's the first thing. Okay, you're not going to talk your way out of it. If the police have got you in there, you're a suspect. Don't talk to them. Just express your Sixth Amendment rights and say, I want a lawyer, and that's it. Okay, because the bottom line is, nobody, including the US government, knows how many laws there are on the books. But ignorance of the law, that's no defense. So they've got, 70,000 pages of tax law. And then it's not just the laws that are in the statutes. Then you've actually got laws that are in the codes, they're in the regulations, you've got all these different agencies. It is impossible to actually know what all the laws are. It's completely impossible. And this is how a lot of people get caught up. This is how people like Martha Stewart. Everyone says she went to jail for inside trading. No, she didn't. She went to jail because she misled a federal agent. So they can catch you out on all these different little tiny things. That's the problem with the system. And people with good lawyers and people who know the justice system can just lawyer up, and that's it. They're protected. And the people who either have bad lawyers or don't know the system or make the mistake of trusting the police when they say, I'm here to help, right? I just want to help you out. I just want to clear something up. Those are the people that end up doing life sentences for crimes they didn't commit.
Yes. I mean, it's just there's so much going on just in terms of, looking at where private entities are more productive than government entities. And I think, but Shakeel, you said something that I agree with. In this case, I don't think privatizing the prison system would do any better than the public prison systems. And the fact of the matter is, we have so many Black American men that are incarcerated in prisons, 13%. Mm-hmm. Right, and that's part of the problem, because that's created a lot of bias over the years. In where I live in Wake County, if I go to the courthouse today, let's say I get a speeding ticket, 8 out of every 10 people going into the court system is black. When I visibly see that every day, and so that's conditioned in the mind. And I think that's my theory. I think there's a bias that exists, which just makes people think when they see someone black, they say, well, they've got to be in crime. I mean, Mark, I don't mean to be offending anybody. I'm just telling you what I hear.
No,
You know,
and that's a common attitude that a lot of folks have. I mean, it's no accident, and particularly those that are, like I said, I am a light-skinned African American, but I don't always get the same reaction as some of my darker complexion brothers and sisters do. But I can tell you that even I've run across it once or twice, but I know that definitely some of my more darker skinned companions and friends have run across the situation of being in an elevator and automatically the person that is of European descent or actually even sometimes Asian descent, grabbing tightly their purse as if they think that person is going to take their purse. It's almost like that stereotype.
Come on, that could be the way they're dressed. That could be the size of them. That could be all sorts of different things. Look, Nick said the other day that, I bought a Bentley a few months ago, yes, and I did, right? Now, I was driving the Bentley to the casino. I had a friend of mine, it was a very, very good friend of mine who's a lawyer, who was over here, and I had a lady in the back. We pulled up to the valet, and the valet says, opens the door for them, lets them out, and then says to me, oh, you can park it over there somewhere. And I'm like, excuse me, thank you very much. I'm actually the VIP member. These are my guests. Thank you very much. Like, go and park the car.
No, and it's across the board. It's not just the African Americans. I was going to say the same thing about
it. He was very embarrassed by it. Now, this was an Asian guy, by the way. Mm-hmm. I could conclude, well, he just looked at me and it must have been based on the color of my skin, or maybe it was just a mistake. He just assumed the guy driving the Bentley was the driver, not the guy who owned the thing. Who knows? But to automatically get your back up and claim racism, come on.
Well, it depends on Shakeel. It depends on the case, and I'll give you examples. For example, for one thing, I'll even use like the Hispanic community or the Latin community. A lot of times folks will hear them speaking and they'll hear them speaking in Spanish. So sometimes people will make the assumption if they're in that space with them that they may be talking about them. They might be discussing what the heck is going on with their kids or what else is going on and aren't even paying attention to the folks that are in that space, whether that's a restaurant or wherever it is. So I agree with you that sometimes there are assumptions made that don't need to be made, but then sometimes those assumptions bear out. I remember many years ago, a friend of mine went with some friends of hers of a whole different kinds of culture. So it was like a UN visit almost of going to a certain local, and it's no longer around, Chinese restaurant, and definitely they heard the person making a lot of comments when they came in with the crowd and everything, and they made some derogatory comments. What they did not know was that my friend actually spoke Mandarin, so she actually pulled the people and the crowd out and was like, look, we're going to leave right now because apparently these folks don't want our money because they're saying some very negative things about certain members of our group, because the group, like I said, was made up of brown, black, white, and other folks. So they moved away from that particular restaurant, and the only reason that they even knew what the person was saying was because my friend Shelley actually spoke Mandarin.
Yeah, I mean, we all have incidences where well, look, I'm gonna defend Shakeel Latimer on one point, and we're gonna break in and talk a little bit about Israel in a minute. But I think we all can agree. What I'm hearing from everybody is nobody agrees that anybody should be treated differently because of the color of their skin. But we need to be sensitive to the fact that it's not over politicized, or that this, what they call cancel culture comes in, right? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, that's the point that I'm making, and everyone says that I'm a white, I'm a white sort of ultra conservative. The current government policy, current federal government policy, and the policy of the Democrats today is specifically not that people shouldn't be treated differently. The current policy is you should be judged by your skin color. We're teaching, or we're not yet, but we're teaching critical race theory. We are teaching that a person should be judged by their skin color, and everybody that fits, everybody who has the same skin color should be treated the same. That's what we're currently teaching. This is what we're doing. Why is Kamala Harris the VP? It's not, nobody ever talked about her accomplishments. It was all about the color of her skin, right? Affirmative action, all these different programs that we're putting into place are all based on the idea that the person of your skin is more important than the content of your character. Martin Luther King would be rolling in his grave. His daughters and granddaughters talk about this all the time. It is appalling. So you're right. I don't think that people should be discriminated against because of the color of their skin. That goes both ways. You know, if a white person goes into an elevator, Mark, and is covered with tattoos and has those tattoos across their neck and, you know, all that sort of stuff, and they're a really scary looking person, I don't care what color the other people in the elevator are, they might feel intimidated, and he could be a Nobel Prize winner who just happens to be into body art. Who knows?
Yeah,
but of course, people are going to make a snap judgment, and they don't have time to learn everybody's story. They're just going to judge somebody based on the way they present themselves. Very few people in Australia would ever pick me as being an investment banker. They're not sure what I do, but they don't pick that normally. Okay, so, you know, people are just going to make these snap decisions. But the idea that we are going to enact as mandatory government policy that institutions should discriminate against people, and what they're doing is to elevate black people, they've got to drag down old whitey, right? And I personally think that if you're a person of color, you should have a little bit more self-respect than to just keep on blaming old whitey for all of your problems.
Well, like I said, I don't know anybody that's using that argument anymore. Like I said, that's more of a 60s and 70s argument. So, like I said, even among my friends in the civil rights community, I don't know anybody that's going into the whole, you know, blame whitey attitude and all of that. So,
Mark, some of Joe Biden's promises before the election are talking about helping farmers, which he's enacted now, is he's going to help farmers in America that are minority owned, farmers that are people of color. As if somehow
that comes down to it.
Hang on, as if somehow if you're a poor white farmer, you're not struggling just as much. He's going to help small businesses that are majority owned by minorities because somehow if you're a white person who owns a deli or a coffee shop, you're not struggling just as much as somebody else. How is that not racist against old whitey? How is that not just blaming whitey for everything?
Well, first off, I come from a farming background. My granddad was a farmer, and I definitely know about the farming background. And a lot of that land was hoodwinked away. I'll just put it that way. And so there's a lot of land that was gone and taken away. So that's where I'm talking about, like, if it's an effort to level the playing field after the playing field has been totally corrupted, and the farmland situation with black farmers was totally corrupted. We lost a whole lot of land, and I've actually got some friends, and I'll try to bring some of them on one of our shows to deal with black farmers.
So therefore, today, let me just make sure I understand the argument. Most white people that came to that are in America today don't descend from the slave-owning class and don't descend from the foundation of America. And even if they do, there is a very, very high likelihood that if they were there or if their families were in America when America was founded, that they didn't come from the slave-owning class of the South. Okay, most white Americans didn't own slaves. Okay, it was very few people. Now, but even if you were to take them, most white people in America came to America after World War I and World War II. They came out of situations in Europe that were absolutely atrocious, or other conflicts that happened. Okay, there was a huge influx of poor white people, poor Europeans that came to America with absolutely nothing. Whatever has happened to black people over history, over American history, what is the idea behind saying that a black person today should be entitled to assistance because of COVID, but a white person shouldn't be, and that's somehow going to level the playing field? We're not talking about let's help one group of people and let's let the other people die and fester.
That's not what the argument is. The argument is actually who is running farming right now. And if you want to talk about who's running farming, farming is a major industry that is basically corporate run. That is who most of farmland is run. It's corporate farms. It is not small farmers of any sort. Hold on a second, Shakeel. It's not small farmers of either black or white, but I'm just saying that in the sense of black farmers, a lot of the farmers or black farmers had their land lost. They weren't treated the same. A lot of the pricing was done differently. There was a lot of things that were done in that realm that made it an unfair practice. That is what Biden and Kamala and the other folks are talking about, trying to give some aid to make it a more level playing field. I have no problem with things that are done to make it a more level playing field.
Farmers. Forget about corporate America. That's good. Corporate farms. It's got nothing to do with it. You're going to help a poor black family who's on a farm, but not a poor white family that's on a farm, and that's not discrimination?
I'm
That's
saying
not
that
discriminating against whitey?
I want to get into some international issues, especially get some Sasha's input. So we're going to stop this debate and continue a little bit tomorrow. I'm going to open up tomorrow with my George Floyd monologue, and we won't devote the whole show to this, but I want to continue this conversation if that's okay. All right.
yeah, that's perfectly fine.
With that being said, let's dive into. Well, first, let's dive into two issues I want to talk about today: Russia and the Arctic. And this came up yesterday on a couple of news shows. But this whole notion that with the Arctic now not being as iced down for a long period because of the warmer climates, there's been a lot of concern about between Secretary of State Tony Blinken and the Russian counterpart. I can't remember his name. He's the foreign minister of Russia. That
Mr. Lavrov.
Yeah, Lavrov. I'm sorry, Lavrov. That Russia wants to really use this as an opportunity to deploy more maritime power and largely to provide a more direct connection from to Asia and to Europe. So, Sasha, what is your thought about this? Because it seems to be a real sticking point between the United States and Russia.
Well, there are a lot of sticking points, I guess. But look, we live our civilization for thousands of years. The main trait of this is competition. It's competition between people, between nations, between races, between religions, between, just name it. Even when you are in the same neighborhood with the same race, you've heard probably keeping up with Joneses. Mm-hmm. Let's see, if Joneses have the latest model Cadillac and you're driving little Chevrolet, how can you be a happy person until you buy yourself a Cadillac? Well, the other thing is maybe you're not making as much money as Joneses, and you cannot buy a Cadillac, but maybe a Buick would be the best what you can get. But you still want to keep it up with Joneses. Now, in international relations, Russia is very much sticking to real politics, and Putin is genius in poker games. He's been dealt very, very lousy cards, but he's playing them with a great virtuosity. His economy is next to nothing. He's in shambles. Everything is falling apart, but he's still playing the game, and he's bluffing his way all the way through, and he's talking to well, I think they're going to meet with Joe Biden. What is this meeting for? Nobody knows. What are they going to discuss? Nobody knows. I think there is no point of discussing anything between Russia and America. There is no common interest. For example, even climate issue. Okay, America wants to probably join back Paris Accord. Russia doesn't need climate. In fact, Russia is all the way through. So there will be a huge change in the climate on Earth. So the Northern Ocean, there will be no more ice. So they will be able to ship containers from China to Europe. And it's much more economical and shorter route than through all the way through Africa or Suez Canal or whatever it might be. So I just don't understand what is there to discuss, really. I'm very curious once that meeting will be set up and agenda will be available to really find out what it's all about.
Mark, over to you.
Sorry, guys.
No problem. Yeah, he was just saying that it's going to be interesting, the agenda and everything. So we'll try to figure that out. And I have no idea what the agenda is going to be either. We've been in the middle of these conversations all the time, and it's always interesting to find out what goes on and whether we are in the middle of a Cold War or not a Cold War. So right now, I think that we're not in one. So we'll see what goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I thought that maybe Biden will ask Putin that he has certain people in the Democratic Party that badly needs his help, such as Bernie Sanders, all this squad, and they need more fundamental upbringing of their Marxist skills, and maybe Putin could help somehow these people. Maybe that's something what will happen. Other than that, I don't know what else there is to discuss.
Yes, I mean this is it's a crazy time and in the world, and I think that this continuing tension between Russia and the United States is making it a very interesting world order, a new world order, right? You've got China, and then you've got Russia, the United States, Europe. Who knows what's going to happen.
Hey,
Mark?
Steve, speaking of a new world order, and it's one of the things, that was the other question I was going to bring up earlier that I was just curious about, and that's actually deals with partially what we were talking about with the African American population, but also the international population. There were certain times before the pandemic, and I imagine that they'll try to bring it back again. Certain countries in Africa were trying to get more folks from America to come to their land, and definitely part of the argument was that to go there, they'd be avoiding quote unquote deadly racism, and Ghana was one of them. So they were saying, back in 2019, they called it the year of the return, and they appealed to a lot of Black Americans to visit Ghana and become acquainted with the continent of their forefathers, even though in a lot of cases we're not even sure which country our forefathers were from, and that's part of that whole European history that exists between African Americans and Europeans, that a lot of folks don't know where their original country of origin was. But there were some great celebrities that thought about going there, like Naomi Campbell and Idris Elba and Steve Harvey and even Cardi B. So I just wondering what you thought about that idea of some of these countries in Africa trying to appeal for folks to come back to their land, because they're even come back to that old farming thing. They're actually offering farmland and offering land for folks to come back home.
Well, I think that's a really great point, Mark. And we don't talk about Africa a lot in the show, but as Shakeel being a global investor, Sasha with his the work he does in economics, Monday, I think Africa is a huge emerging market and an economic opportunity in terms of just the population. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, what will be the opportunities moving forward for people to go back to start businesses. It's a huge market. Shakeel, wouldn't you agree? Africa is a big market.
I think Africa as a continent is a huge market with massive potential. I think that you have some countries like Nigeria and many others, but like Nigeria, that have really, have really advanced themselves and have a lot of potential. But you do have some poorer countries in Africa, and I think that the things that it appears that Western liberals are so against are the very things that are going to help places like Africa and poor places in Asia as well. And those are things like enforcement of contract, law, property rights, all of those sorts of things. Those are the things that you need to have, so that when you buy a property, you can do something. Banking is another thing. If you don't have contracts and you don't have enforceability of contracts and you don't have banking, without availability of credit, that makes it really hard for businesses to expand. And so what you end up having is an underground economy, and the money lenders have got a bad reputation for a reason. And if you don't want your legs broken, you're better off getting a loan from JP Morgan than the guy on the street corner. So that's the sort of thing that I think Africa is going to need. They're going to need to get their legal system and the legal processes in order. And in a lot of African nations, they have an enormous amount of regulations. So, that's something as well that they need to do is just maybe ease up on those regulations. What unfortunately you're seeing a big part of the African employment is stuff that's not on the books. People that are working who are just being paid cash or being paid in kind and things like that, because it's very hard to employ people in Africa because you can't get rid of people, and there's all these other things that I think have hurt Africa. But look, those people very much deserve to have an opportunity to improve their lives. And I think that if the best minds of the West in law and economics and policy can go in there and really help them, then I think that'll make a huge difference. And of course, they need to have access to education and medical care and a reasonable food supply.
Has anybody of you ever been to Africa?
I've never been. I'd like to go. I've never been.
I've been, but it doesn't really count. So, because I only went to the airport.
Haven't been, have had family, including parents that have been, but I have not been yet, but I want to go.
I have a strong connection with the Nigerian community, just because there's a lot of Nigerian Americans in North Carolina.
Right.
But I was at the United Nations with the Global Empowerment Movement, which is predominantly run by Africans who have since moved to America, who are trying to improve conditions back home. So I have spoken to many people who are African, who can tell me about some of the issues that they face back home.
No, and I've actually got
in Africa for 5 days. And I think I have first-hand experience of what it is, how it works, and I'm not going to tell you about it today, but maybe someday I'll tell you about it.
Well, we'd love to devote a show on that, Sasha, for you to talk about Africa. I mean, I think it's something.
I'll tell you a few things about Africa, yes.
We'd love
be great.
Well, we're going to close out the show today. I want to thank everyone. We're going to begin tomorrow with a monologue honoring George Floyd, just to talk maybe a little bit differently about our opinions of addressing race and also listening and respecting each other. I think I want to thank everybody for sharing their views. I want to end my monologue today on just some thoughts of Israel, to just have you all thinking about this as we talk about U.S. foreign policy towards Israel. And I don't know about you all, but for me, in my closing remarks, I think that we've seen this happen every 10 to 12 years. There's an escalation of conflict. We call for a ceasefire. Ceasefire stops. We say that it's not going to happen again, and it happens again. And I think at the end of the day, one thing that I want to just share my opinion with for the show on World Edition is that Israel has really become the superpower of the Middle East. I mean, their GDP is 14% times that of Egypt, 8 times that of Iran. They have surpassed reserves of $180 billion, making them the 13th in the world. They spend 5% of their GDP on research, and they're leading in artificial intelligence, all kinds of technology. In fact, there's a book written called Startup Nation about how Israel has become a destination for startups and entrepreneurs around the world. And so at the end of the day, my take is that I don't think things will ever change. From Israel's perspective, they're the superpower, and they can do and attack whatever they want. Their military is so strong that for every Israeli that dies in conflicts, at least 20 to 30 Palestinians die. I think the only way that this conflict in the area of the world will change is if somehow the government of Israel decides to go for a two-state solution, or we just accept that it's never going to change. But I think we have to realize that the elephant in the room is Israel. They are the superpower.
Sorry, look, I know that this has become the sort of talking point of the extreme progressive side of the Democrat Party at the moment. But what difference does it make whether the death tally is more or less in Israel or Palestine?
Because Israel's got less to lose. They can keep bombing and less people die.
Look,
my point wasn't being
Israel is a stronger country in that region doesn't mean that they are therefore wrong. Okay?
I'm not saying that they're wrong. They have less to lose. They have less to lose. That's what I'm saying.
So, look, again, the issues are complicated. The idea, by the way, that you just said, if Israel chooses to offer a two-state solution, Israel's offered the two-state solution many times throughout history. Look, I feel for the innocent people of Palestine. I really do. They don't deserve to be held hostage by Hamas or any other political group. But we can't blame Israel for everything.
No, but that's what I was trying to say. The only way that's a great way for us to end. The only way I think we'll end is for. I think there are people in the Israel in the nation of Israel that believe just like you and me, Shakeel, that they want the Palestinians to live in peace, and they don't want innocent Palestinians dead. So perhaps it'll take a new generation after Netanyahu, a younger generation coming from a new demographic Israel that would be open to this. So you are right. Not every Israeli does not want there to be people.
The majority of Israelis, the majority of Palestinians want there to be a two-state solution. And just like politics in any other region, what the majority of people want is a thing that nobody gets.
Okay, well, that's a good way to end. Well, I wanted to end my monologue just to bring this perspective. Okay, so it's not, but folks, thank you for being on World Edition, Pod TV. We'll be back tomorrow on the anniversary of George Floyd's death for some remarks from me. Open it up. You guys are great. Sasha Stark, thank you. Mark Lee, Shakeel Latimer. Have a good day down under, my friend. And we'll see you tomorrow.